We are back for another episode of App Stories. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci. And I want to start off by thanking our sponsors, Pillow, Microsoft Lists, and New Relic. Federico Viticci, how are you doing today?
Hello, I am doing very well. I'm still catching up on as we're recording this, it's yesterday's Apple event. I think you and Alex have done an excellent job at MacStories breaking down all the news and announcements and details. I know people have really enjoyed it. We had fun with the Club MacStories Discord, and I am ready to talk iPads and Macs, John. Apologies because I really don't want to talk about the SE. I'll let people into a secret. John was really excited about the iPhone SE, but unfortunately, we had to pull the... No, it's not really true. I mean, I'm sure it's fun to dunk on the iPhone SE, but serious talk, I know there's a place for it. I personally know family members who love the iPhone SE. I think the iPhone SE makes total sense as a product. It's just not an exciting product to cover on a podcast. That's all. Yeah,
that is true. And the thing is, it really didn't change that much. And I think the most interesting thing about it is a negative, which is that the price was raised to $429. Yeah. So, right? I mean, that was the most surprising thing about what changed. We've got 5G and that sort of thing as well. But we're going to skip that. Why don't we just dive right into the iPad Air? Because this is an iPad that you and I have both used, at least the previous generation model. And I really like it. I mean, I'm a fan of Touch ID in the top button, and I'm also a fan of the form factor because it's powerful enough to allow you to do an awful lot of the things that an iPad Pro can do, but it's a lot more holdable. It works a lot better as just a standalone tablet for reading a book or playing a game or browsing the web, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, so I have a lot of thoughts about this iPad Air, and I also have a lot of...
All right, let's dig into
I have also a lot of questions that will probably only be answered when we finally get our hands on one. So the moment I saw the iPad Air, and a few thoughts and questions from 2 years ago came back to me. Primarily, the comparison between the 11-inch iPad Pro and the 10.9-inch updated iPad Air. So when the iPad Air relaunched in 2020 with the new design, and it was the first iPad to have the Touch ID button on the side that later was borrowed by the iPad mini, I immediately wondered, what's the market for this iPad Air that has the same chip that you can find in an 11-inch iPad Pro? Mostly, roughly the same display size, same physical footprint, more color options, which was not a thing that you could get on the iPad Pro, support for the second generation pencil, Magic Keyboard, but it doesn't have, Face ID, it doesn't have ProMotion, doesn't have more speakers, right? A few months later, so I wrote that review in, I believe it was October 2020. I wrote that review from the perspective of the iPad Pro 11 inches in a weird spot right now because this iPad Air, if you are fine with the storage configuration, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and if you're fine with the things that it's missing, basically the conclusion was if you can get by with 64 gigs of storage, this is probably the base model iPad that most people should buy. Right, that was my go-to recommendation. If you're looking for an iPad that is not an iPad mini, that is not a base model iPad, and that has a modern design, this is the model you should go for. This is the iPad Air you should be going for. Now, a few months later, that conclusion changed because the iPad Pro was updated with the M1, and so obviously the divide between the iPad Air and the 11-inch iPad Pro grew even bigger because of the much more powerful M1 chip found in the iPad Pro. And of course, there was still something that, made me think about, does the 11-inch iPad Pro really have a place to exist? And that was the fact that the 2021 11-inch iPad Pro does not have a Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display. Only the 12.9 does. So sure, there's an M1, ProMotion, Face ID, and better audio, But compared to the iPad Air, it's still a very confusing sort of mid-range of the iPad lineup. Now, of course, we're talking about the new iPad Air. And the new iPad Air has the M1 chip, more colors. And basically, that one big difference is gone again. It's got faster USB-C. It's a 3.1 Gen 2, which means 10 gigabit per second, but it's not Thunderbolt 4. You will be able to plug it into a Pro Display XDR or a new studio display, the 5K one. Sure, you're going to get the basic mirroring. We'll see what happens at WWDC. So it's got faster USB-C, but it's not Thunderbolt 4. It's got Touch ID instead of Face ID. It still has stereo speakers, so 2 speakers instead of 4, and it's got 2 microphones instead of 5 on the 11-inch iPad Pro. And it starts at 64 gigs. And so with that evolution in mind, I now wonder again, what's the deal with the mid-range of the iPad lineup?
Yeah, I have the same question. I think it's, I describe this as a closing of the gap, and it is. It's closing the gap between the two models that we saw before and we're seeing again. And it really is, I don't know, it's a tough call for a lot of people, I think, because especially when you consider the storage options, because there's nothing in between 64 gigabytes and 256 gigabytes. And that's a big jump. 64 is pretty anemic depending on what you're going to use this for. If you're planning to do video, which Apple touted at the event, saying, filmmakers can make movies with iMovie.
Wasn't that a bit out of touch, by the way? Like with all the discussion that has been happening lately regarding,
it's super out of touch.
It's kind of out of touch because I feel like we are, in many ways, and I hate myself for saying this, but we are back in a way to where we were almost 2 years ago, with the discussion in the iPad community being, well, the hardware is amazing, but the software really isn't there. And I feel like iPadOS 15, while it simplified a bunch of things, and I wrote this in my review, you can go check in September, I made this exact point. Like, sure, it's bringing consistency. It's simplifying multitasking, but it's not fundamentally creating new things that can be accomplished on an iPad Pro. And so I feel like we are bumping into those limitations again. And so while there's this conversation, you see folks like me and Chris Lawley, we're trying to use macOS more, especially because of the new MacBook Pros. It does feel a bit out of touch with the community clamoring for Final Cut and Pro apps, really show us what you can do with the software on an iPad Pro. At an event, you go out and say, well, filmmakers can use iMovie. And I don't know. I just thought that, read the room. Guys, come on.
Our thanks to Pillow for their support of App Stories. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can help improve your health and well-being in more ways than you can ever imagine. Pillow is a simple app that can help you be more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically and give you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or iPad, you can do that too, with just the press of a button before going to sleep. If you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trend, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each sleep session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might affect your sleep. A lot of users are surprised by the results. If your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of those sounds during each sleep session and give you a rating of each exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metric with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other health metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before you go to sleep or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps can help boost your productivity, focus, and creativity, plus your well-being overall. If you're working from home, you can use Pillow's Power Nap feature to get a little rest during the day. Pillow can wake you up with your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm feature. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow. You can use it totally anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your information anywhere else. Pillow is free to download from the App Store and comes with a set of great features that you can start using today for free every single day. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a 7-day free trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show. When you look at this device, you can say, all right, well, there are people who can live with 64 gigabytes because if you're not editing video and you're not playing big chunky games and you're really just working with text and browsing the web and doing email and those sorts of tasks, you can get by with that sort of storage. However, you've just bought an iPad that has an M1 chip in it, and it's not really taking full advantage of that power if you're doing email and reading a book. I mean, that's part of the problem here is that, well, you have to, Apple hasn't really made a compelling argument for why someone should step up to an M1. Now, I mean, they're pushing that chip throughout the lineup. So if you buy a new iPad, you're going to kind of end up with one eventually anyway, at least if you're at the higher end of the spectrum. But they haven't made I don't think they've made a very good argument for why you need an M1. And at the same time, by hamstringing to a degree the Air and the Mac and the iPad mini with a 64 gigabyte option, I mean, I guess I understand that it's more affordable to more people. On the other hand, I'm just not sure that the kinds of things that you could take advantage of the M1 are going to be really very practical with that limited amount of storage, if you follow what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of that. Like, they didn't provide a meaningful explanation as to why the M1 is needed. And at this point, I have to wonder, maybe there doesn't have to be an explanation. Maybe the M1... I think we get stuck on this topic because we saw the M1, last year as this huge performance leap for the Mac.
Right.
And when we saw the M1 arrive on the iPad Pro, we all thought, okay, well, now they are really serious about the iPad Pro and they want to bring Mac-level performance to the iPad. Turns out, not quite, because they haven't done much.
Not so much.
And so now we look at the M1 coming to the iPad Air and we're like, oh, but they got to provide an explanation. Like, why are you bringing the M1 to the iPad? And I think the reason is the M1 is just the base chip right now. It doesn't really mean anything. It could be called A16 and that would be it. This is just the M1 is the base chip for modern computers, but the really pro stuff happens, with the M1 Pro and above. And I would even say maybe not the M1 Pro, but maybe M1 Max and M1 Ultra. It's like the really pro. Like, when you get a computer with an M1 Max, that's when you ask yourself the question, what am I doing here? What's all this power for? The M1 Pro is like, fancier M1. M1 Max is, okay, now I'm serious with this chip. I better accomplish some serious things on this computer. But the M1
I
is
think
just
that's a good point.
The baseline, maybe. Maybe Apple sees it that way.
Yeah, maybe. And I think that's a good point. I mean, it's very easy sometimes, I think, to overthink these things. And that's also why I wanted to raise, too, the possibility of maybe the difference between 64 gigabytes and 256 isn't as intentional as it seems. There are sometimes differences in the way components fit together and work together, or just availability of components that make it harder to provide certain certain, different kinds of components. And maybe it's a marketing thing. I don't know. Do you think that what do you think's behind that big jump? It's strange to me that there's not a 128 option in there. And I maybe it's segmenting the Air into the casual user and the more work pro user, maybe.
Or it's just a strategy to get people to spend more money easily. Like, oh, do you want to get the 64?
It's quite a bit more.
I mean, it's what, $200 more, right? Because you go from $599 to $799 when you jump from 64. No, wait, what's the jump again?
64 to 256.
Yes, but in price-wise, it's $599 to $749, right? So what is that? $150 is my math, right? Yeah. And you're like, well, I guess I could not even double. I could quadruple the storage, right? For $150. And, I may just go for it.
Right. No, I guess that makes sense. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fan of the 64 gigabyte model of anything, to be honest, whether it's a phone or an iPad or anything. I mean, it's like Apple kept 32 gigabytes around absolutely forever, like years beyond where it was really useful, because the operating system itself on the phones takes up a fair chunk of that. And I feel like that's where we're heading with 64, that 64 is something we're going to be talking about and saying is not enough in 2025.
Mm-hmm. Well, some people will say it's fine, and I saw these comments on Discord last night. Some people think, oh, it's totally fine if you're a student and you do the occasional note-taking, a few voice recordings, watch some YouTube videos, and do email and PDF documents. And I can see how 64 gigs, like if you don't install any games or download any 4K movies or TV shows, I can see why it's totally fine. If you do lightweight text editing, PDFs, emails, and YouTube. But the moment you install like any modern game or download a season of a TV show, doesn't even have to be a long TV show, like 10 episodes of a comedy series. Well, those 64 gigs, they go by fast, I think. So it really depends on what you're doing with this. I wanted to do, John, some quick pricing comparisons, because I keep thinking about this 11-inch iPad Pro and as compared to the iPad Air. So for context, the 64 gig iPad Air, Wi-Fi only, so base model, $599 iPad alone, right? But of course, if you're purchasing an iPad, the chances are if you're the kind of person that wants to get more things done on an iPad because it's not an iPad mini, you want to get some typing done, you want to get some work done, you're going to add a Magic Keyboard. Well, once you add a Magic Keyboard, the price goes up to $898. So $898. Now, if you get the base model 11-inch Wi-Fi only iPad Pro, it's not 64 gigs. It's 128 gigs. It starts at $200 more. So it's double the storage, and it's $200 more at $799. However, once you add the Magic Keyboard to the base model 11-inch iPad Pro, it's $1,098. Okay, so that's what you keep that $200 gap essentially between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, but it's also double the storage on the iPad Pro, right? So you get more things, double the storage, $200 more in either whether you go with or without the Magic Keyboard. I don't know. I feel, and of course, even another interesting comparison. If you get the higher storage, iPad Air, as you mentioned, you cannot get 128 gigs. You can only go up to 256. And if you do that and you fully spec it out, so iPad Air 256 with a Magic Keyboard, that's $1,048. So at that point, you're only saving $50 compared to the iPad Pro. However, at that point, you are double the storage of the base model iPad Pro, which is also an interesting comparison. You could get an iPad Pro and give it a Magic Keyboard, and that would be $1,098. Or you could get an iPad that is double the storage of the base model iPad Pro, and it costs $50 less. So I don't know. I guess it depends on what you prioritize, right?
I suppose it does, because you are giving up some, as you already outlined, you're giving up some features with the iPad Air, and what's the value of those to you versus what's the value of the storage. And I think that's why this is such a hard comparison to make, because people are in different situations, obviously, and they value things differently. And I guess in a sense that is good that there are a lot more choices. I do think it has the potential for confusing consumers, but I think you also do make a good point about the 64 gig being okay for a lot of people, just because while it still bothers me, and I guess that's just because of the way I use the iPad, you're right. Streaming is a big thing in terms of, video, music. You really don't need to download your music library or or 5 movies to your iPad most of the time. Maybe you're getting on a flight and you need a couple of movies to watch on the way to your destination. But most of the time, most people don't need to download a lot of things, and they can just stream them over Wi-Fi or something. And the only difference then being things like where you really do need to use chunky files, whether it's video or something like a big game.
I love chunky files, personally. All right, so we'll see about the iPad Air. I have a few. I think it would be interesting to play around with it as as an iPad mini. Like, I wonder if, because here's my problem, John. Sylvia has been eyeing the iPad mini that I have. She's been requesting access to my iPad mini.
Interesting.
Because she wants to use the iPad mini. And I kind of wonder, like, can the iPad Air, like, could I use the iPad Air as my media consumption iPad for a while? Like, is there, I don't know. It'd be interesting to, I don't think anything beats the iPad mini personally, but it could be a fun experiment to try for a while. I mean, it's what we're here for. It's
a good experiment. I've done that. And that's, I bought the last generation iPad Air before I got the mini. And I used it in between. I got it as a replacement to the old generation mini that had the Touch ID button, home button. And then I got the new mini after the Air. And having been through that transition of 2 different generations of minis and an iPad Air in between, the Air really works quite well for a lot of those use cases, but it's still not quite as good because it's just a little too big. I mean, it's definitely doable. It's just that the mini is really perfect if you're reading a book, and it's great for even movies and things. And, you're reading in bed, watching some TV show in bed, something like that. You really can't beat the mini for that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Microsoft Lists, your smart information tracking app in Microsoft 365. Keeping track of information is something that's in everyone's job description today. Quite simply, writing things down is what works for simple lists, but it can get overwhelming when you need to stay on top of hundreds of items and get others to pay attention and act. Microsoft Lists is a Microsoft 365 app that helps you easily track information and organize your work. Lists are simple, smart, and flexible, so you can stay on top of what matters most to your team. Track issues, assets, routines, contacts, inventory, and more using customizable views and smart rules and alerts to keep everyone in sync. With ready-made templates, you can quickly start lists online, on the new mobile app for iOS, and directly within Microsoft Teams. And because it's part of Microsoft 365, you can rely on enterprise-ready security and compliance. When you think about it, so much of what we all do in our work is track information that falls into certain categories. Lists are a terrific format for doing that, and something everyone already does, whether it's a list of tasks, reference materials, links, addresses, upcoming projects, and more. What I like about Microsoft Lists is its flexibility, integration with Microsoft 365, and collaboration tools. So many apps are about tracking lists and information that fall into a narrow category, but Microsoft Lists' strength is that it brings all of those different types of lists into a unified, well-organized place where they can be shared and work in tandem with your other 365 apps. The app has a colorful, clear UI, supports dark mode, lets you scan QR codes and add photos to lists, and has strong emphasis on enterprise-grade security, making it a great choice for your work needs. Your lists just got a whole lot smarter. Get more done with Microsoft Lists. Go to aka.ms/mslists for more information, videos, demos, blog posts, and more. Again, that URL is aka.ms/mslists. Make a list and let it flow. Our thanks to Microsoft Lists for their support of App Stories.
All right, John, talk to me about the Mac. Also because you've bought stuff, I think.
I did. And I first of all, the easiest purchase was the display, and we can get to that in a bit and why that happens to be. But I also picked up the Mac Studio. And I did this because just as much as I like the MacBook Air, and it does satisfy the majority of my needs most of the time, there are situations in the things that I do where I start running into constraints of memory in particular and speed in general. And so for me, the Mac Studio was a purchase in large measure, not so much because of the chips inside, but because of the extra memory I could access, as well as the fast storage. Because I think for a lot of people, they're not going to notice an enormous difference in speed between the various M1 chips. And I only say that because so many apps that we use day to day are single threaded. And if you look at the single core scores for across the M1 lineup, from the base model M1 all the way up to the M1 Ultra, there are differences between them, but they're not enormous differences. So you'll see speed gains as you move up to the Max and the Ultra, but unless you're doing multi-core computing, you're not going to see enormous differences. Now, you will see very big differences for things like machine learning based stuff. You know, there are a lot of photo editors and video editing tools that rely on machine learning, and those take advantage of multiple cores and the neural engine and do very well as you move up the lineup. But if you're in a text editor, you know, something like that, doing your email, you're not going to notice huge differences there. Although having more memory and having fast storage does make a difference in those situations where you're moving files around to different places on your Mac, or you're doing something else that requires you to have a lot of apps open at once, and 16 gigabytes of memory, which is what I have on my MacBook Air, isn't enough. And I'll tell you, one of the funniest things that I've found that has been a constraint for me has been MailChimp, because I think I shared with you not too long ago that I was putting together the MacStories weekly newsletter not long ago, and a single tab of Safari that had MailChimp open was consuming 12 gigabytes of memory. And that's not Apple's fault as much as it is MailChimp's. I mean, MailChimp is a web app that has a lot of drag and drop functionality. It's a very complex web app, and I'm not surprised that it consumes a lot of memory, but it consumes way too much memory. I mean, 12 gigabytes is a lot of memory for a single tab in Safari, and I do regularly have to shut it down and restart my Mac in order to finish the newsletter because of that. And this is not even where we have a particularly long and complex newsletter. It happens all the time. In any event, that's in part why I bought the Mac Studio.
So can you go over your configuration again?
Yes. So I got the base model M1 Ultra.
Okay.
I actually went with the Ultra because I wanted to see what it's all about more than anything else. That is the splurge, because I don't think I pretty clearly don't need an M1 Ultra for most of the work I do. I'm sure it'll make things like doing some of the audio filtering and things that I do for podcasts will make that faster, where there's multi-core stuff going on, and maybe some of the image editing that I do now and then. But so I got the base model M1 Ultra. I got 64 gigabytes of memory, so that's also the base amount, and 2 terabytes of storage. And I have 2 terabytes on the M1 Air, and that's been great. I really have gotten to the point, I don't like to have to manage my storage, and so I just rather have a margin of error there. I did consider going all the way up to 4 terabytes, only because I'm expecting this to be a Mac that I use for 4 or 5 years at a minimum. This is kind of a long-term purchase, and having the right amount of storage is important in that situation. But I think I can get by with 2 terabytes without too much trouble.
Nice. That's I'm happy that you went with the Ultra, because I think that's going to treat you well for years to come, really. I mean, assuming that you don't start doing, so I don't know, advanced 3D and VR development, I don't think that's in the cards for you, but hey, you never know. But still, that's a pretty good computer that you when is it coming?
It's coming mid-April. I didn't pull the trigger right away because I was really having a hard time deciding between. It really came down more for me between the various tiers of memory and storage than it did the chip itself, because I very early on decided, I want to try out the Ultra and see what that's all about. The other thing that I really like about this Mac, one other reason I think it's going to be a good fit with my workflow, is that right now, as much as I like the Air, it's only got 2 ports on it. And so I'm using hubs, and I've got wires going everywhere. And it's just kind of a patched together mess. And I'm really looking forward to this combined with the Apple Studio display, having the display on my desk and having the Mac Studio on a bookshelf next to my desk, and not having to have wires everywhere. There'll be wires coming out of the Mac on the bookshelf, but my desk can be a little bit neater than it currently is, which I think will be really nice.
I'm very happy for you. I think this is
Thank you.
It's gonna be nice to have. It's gonna be one
nice.
chunky boy at your desk.
It is. It's the I/O on this thing is fantastic. The other thing about the Ultra, which is different than the Max version, is that you get Thunderbolt 4 on the front too. I haven't really decided there's a possibility I may just put this on my desk and not put it on the bookshelf, but it has Thunderbolt 4 on the front and the back, plus the display has Thunderbolt 3. So there's way more than I need in terms of I/O at this point, which is fantastic, because I haven't had. I've been managing I/O with the MacBook Air since I've gone to that, and I've got myself to a system with docks that works quite well, but I just as soon, get rid of some of those and put those off to the side and have it all kind of self-contained. It'll be a lot simpler that way. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there. It's 9 p.m. and you're finally unwinding from work, but then your phone buzzes with an alert. Something is broken and your mind's already racing at what it could be. Is it global? Is it the server? Is it the network? Who knows what it might be? Now the whole team is scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person after person to find and fix the issue. That won't happen if you use New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you normally buy separately, so engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in a single place. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code, so you know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why dev and ops teams at DoorDash, GitHub, Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up New Relic in your environment. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does, and you get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free forever with no credit card required. Just go to newrelic.com/appstories. That's newrelic.com/appstories. Head on over to newrelic.com/appstories and check out the details today. Our thanks to New Relic for their support of the show.
Studio display. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I think it looks beautiful. If I were not in the market for a gaming monitor, I really want to have a like one of those high refresh rates gaming monitors in my future.
Yeah, and understandable.
I would be totally like all over this studio display. But
that's the one thing that disappointed me about it is the refresh rate.
Right. But there's also one other thing, which is I would have been super intrigued if Apple said, and now with Studio Display, you can have a proper extended home screen mode on your iPad.
Yes.
Which I don't think Apple is going to do that sort of thing. I think once Apple adds external display support to iPad, I think it's going to be for all monitors. But, you never know. This thing is running an A13 chip inside. So there's special code that is happening inside the display. Also, at that price point, we shouldn't have hoped for, like, is there any monitor that does 5K 120 hertz?
True.
Under $2,000? I don't think it exists, right? Or maybe, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Still, you're getting one of these, right?
I am, and I think that the reason I thought 120 would be nice would be for the same reason that you would want it is to play games. And I just like right now I have an LG 4K display that's about 5 years old, and it has both DisplayPort and HDMI, and I have at various times had a Nintendo Switch connected to it with the HDMI, which is kind of nice. And the display I'm using now is only 60 hertz, and it's fine for the Switch. But it would be pretty nice to have it serve double duty as both my Mac screen and an Xbox screen or a PS5 or whatever it happens to be. But I don't think that. I mean, I think that that's kind of an edge case use anyway. For typical computing, 60 hertz I think is just totally fine. I went and looked at my old LG display, and so I mean, for reference, this was first debuted this LG monitor in 2016, and I bought it in early 2017. And it's 60 hertz, it's 4K, it's matte screen. I looked at it compared side by side with the Apple Studio Display. It's got the Apple Studio Display has twice the nits of brightness that this one has. So I think that that's going to be a pretty dramatic difference. Plus, of course, the Apple display is 5K and this is 4K. Same size, 27 inches. The display that I have now, the LG, is, your typical LG display. It's kind of plasticky around the edges. It's not terrible, but it's a very base end model in that it has multiple connections for video, but it doesn't have any USB ports. It has a 3.5 millimeter jack, but it doesn't have its own speakers or a camera or anything like that. And that's one of the things that has attracted me to Apple's display is that camera and the speakers in it. Because one of the things that I've I think a lot of people have listened to the show know that I've used Mac Minis for a very long time. And really one of the bigger frustrations with a Mac Mini is that you need to have external cameras and speakers if you have a display that doesn't support those. And so that's yet another one of these situations where I've just got too many wires everywhere because I have to add those somewhere into this system to get sound and video. But with the Apple Studio Display, that's all built right into it, eliminating the need for any extra peripherals. So I'm looking forward to having that as well and cutting down on the clutter.
Yeah, the center stage I think is going to be extremely nice to have for video calls, for all kinds of things that involve being on video. It looks great. It would be nice to see maybe a smaller version of this, but I don't think Apple is going to make one. I don't know. I feel like the price is right for what it is. It's not what I'm looking for personally, but I think a ton of Apple users are going to be buying this one because of the nice package that it is, like the integrated package that it is with spatial audio, with center stage. Looks good. It's made by Apple. Would have been nice to have a tilt and height adjustable option that was not an extra $400. But Apple, at least it's not $1,000, I guess. And plus, if you're the type of person who, already owns like a VESA arm, for example, you can get the VESA mount is a free adapter, right? So I think is it free? I think it's free, right? The VESA option.
I think so. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, you can VESA mount this thing, and it's you can use a VESA arm or whatever. So you can use it in different configurations, including portrait orientation, which is going to be nice for coding and programmers in general. So not for me, but it's very good looking, and center stage is awesome, and spatial audio is potentially interesting because this thing is going to have bigger speakers than an iPad Pro, and probably even bigger than an iMac because it's bigger than an iMac 24-inch.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to sound pretty decent, honestly, with the sort of array of tweeters and woofers that Apple talked about yesterday. I think you have.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna have a pretty sweet setup in the near future, John.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I do think the speakers are going to be good enough for my circumstances. I have at various times used a HomePod Mini in my office, which is just a little anemic. It's a little bit far away from my desk, and it's just not quite what I want. So I have some Harman Kardon Soundstick speakers, which are those transparent ones that have been around since the beginning of time, but it's like their more modern Bluetooth version. Those sound really good, and I actually just set those up about a week ago. And as much as I like them, I don't like having all these wires everywhere, because to really get good stereo separation, I've got one of the sticks on each corner of my desk. I've got the woofer down on the floor near my desk, and it's, even though it's Bluetooth, because it connects to the iPad via Bluetooth, but it still all the pieces need to connect together, and there's, obviously a power cord and everything. So there's still a lot of wires, notwithstanding the fact that it's Bluetooth. And I'm just looking forward to it being a little neater. And because it's also a room where I work that's open to much of the rest of the first floor of my home, where the rest of my family is watching TV or reading a book or doing whatever, I don't play music really loud in this room really ever. So it also happens to be at the bottom of the stairs. So I would keep people up at night if I was up late and people are trying to sleep. So it's nice that I think these speakers will work really well for that kind of situation. I also like that because it has these Thunderbolt 3 ports in the back, what I hope to do is there'll be obviously the one Thunderbolt cable running from the Mac Studio to the display, and then certain things like, I don't know, my Stream Deck and my audio interface can go right into the display. I don't have to have those trailing off, especially if I put the computer on a bookshelf or something like that. I don't have to have a long cable trailing off to the bookshelf to get those to work. I can reserve the ports on the Mac for things that I don't need to have within arm's reach, whether it's a backup drive or whatever it happens to be. So that's kind of my plan. I've been thinking about this setup a lot the last day. All right, Federico, well, that's a good discussion. I'm looking forward to getting my gear. That I think the Mac comes mid-April and the display actually comes late April because I changed my mind at the last minute and I swapped the nano texture for the regular texture because I was a little bit of concern that, one, I didn't need the nano texture, which is an extra cost, but also just kind of maintaining it and making sure that it's clean and all that. Regular glass just seemed like an easier way to go on that one. And I did get the tilt and raise arm because I do like to adjust the height of my display from time to time. In any event, we will be back very soon with another episode of App Stories. I want to thank our sponsors for today's episode, Pillow, Microsoft Lists, and New Relic. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.